Good evening and welcome to this special online event featuring acclaimed filmmaker James Ivory. We're so glad you are joining us. My name is Paul Grandal. I'm the director of the New York State Writers Institute at the University at Albany. We're pleased to offer this live stream so all of you can enjoy it from the comfort of your homes during this long winter storm. I hope you're all warm and safe and have not lost power or faced other difficulties. I'd also encourage all of you viewing this program to visit our website, www.nyswritersinstitute.org. Join our mailing list so you can get all the latest updates on our programming schedule. Also, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now TikTok, and keep up on the Writers Institute that way. It's my pleasure to say a few introductory words and to welcome our special guests, beginning with James Ivory, an Oscar Award winner, a legendary figure in cinema for the past 50 plus years as co-founder of Merchant Ivory Productions. He's a director, a screenwriter, a beloved interpreter of literary classics, and now most recently, a memoirist. I also must mention that the Writers Institute awarded Mr. Ivory an Ironweed Award for exemplary achievement in film at our inaugural Albany Film Festival last year. Our second Albany Annual Film Festival will be held live and in person on Saturday, April 2nd. We'll provide more details on our website soon. We hope you can join us then on the UAlbany campus on April 2nd. Let's all hope we don't get another snowstorm that late in the spring. Our special guest is Stephen Soucy, filmmaker, distinguished University at Albany alumnus, and a regular Writers Institute collaborator. Stephen recently completed an amazing major documentary film titled Merchant Ivory, 3 years of hard work. James Ivory is serving as executive producer, and they're currently seeking distribution for the film. We're so fortunate that Stephen has provided tonight a 5-minute cut, never before seen. This is a special of Merchant Ivory, which will serve as a wonderful overview and conversation starter for this program. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions of our three guests. Hopefully Peter will be here via the Q&A function on your computer. We'll get to as many questions as time permits. I also want to note, we've provided a convenient link on the screen to our local independent bookseller, Bookhouse of Stuyvesant Plaza. You can easily order a copy of Solid Ivory online, and the book will be shipped directly to you. Now I invite you to get comfortable. You got some popcorn, a soda, maybe an adult beverage. Prepare to enjoy a very special evening with a legend of the cinema.
I'd like to welcome everyone. My name is Stephen Soucy. Our thanks to the New York State Writers Institute for inviting us to be a part of their spring 2022 lineup of events. And I'd like to open tonight with an introduction of James Ivory's recently published memoir, Solid Ivory. And I actually borrowed some of this copy from Peter Cameron's website. So I believe Peter wrote this. I wish he was with us tonight, but as Paul said, he's located in Vermont, and I have to imagine he's probably having some internet connectivity issues. But Solid Ivory is a wonderful collection of James Ivory's reminiscences of his childhood in Klamath Falls, Oregon, his romantic and sexual education at the University of Oregon, and then the University of Southern California's film school, his journeys as a young man and filmmaker in Venice, Italy, and Kabul, Afghanistan, his early movie-making experiences in India, his professional and personal relationships with his key collaborators, Ismail Merchant and Ruth Prower Habvala, and his experience working with such people as Vanessa Redgrave, Raquel Welch, Satyajit Ray, George Cukor, and many other artistic luminaries of the 20th century. Solid Ivory was edited by Peter Cameron, and Solid Ivory is a portrait of an extraordinary life told by an unmatched storyteller. Just a Another quick bio. James Ivory is an Academy Award-winning director, producer, and screenwriter. His directorial work includes A Room with a View, Howard's End, and The Remains of the Day, which you just saw clips from each of those films. And for each of these films, he was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Director. In 2017, he won an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay for Call Me by Your Name. And he has also won 3 BAFTA awards, a Directors Guild of America Lifetime Achievement Award, which I believe he won that in the mid-1990s, if I'm correct. So that was a lifetime achievement at that point, and he just kept going. And he's still going, and we'll talk about that later too. Jim, I'm wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about the contents of Solid Ivory and how the book came together.
It was written really over a period of 40 years. I mean, it was all sorts of things that I wrote, some of which were published. Some I wrote just for the fun of it, and I put them away. Some I had to add to the book when we decided that it would be a book and having a certain sort of form and content. So it's a long developing work, which began, I think the earliest piece was written, it was a piece I wrote for the New Yorker about Satyajit Ray, who was my great mentor, the great Indian film director. And that was in 1969 or something. I think that's the oldest one. And they come right up to, I mean, I'm still fiddling around with it. I mean, there's some, it's going to be republished in paperback in the fall, I gather, and I'm adding some little bits and pieces to it. I've been doing that in this last week, but I couldn't do much else because it's been such miserable weather. And, but it's just an ongoing, kind of an ongoing project.
And would you, so Ruth Jabala was Merchant Ivory's longtime screenwriter. You would work on the Merchant Ivory screenplays, especially the early ones. I mean, well, I guess all of them, but with Ruth. And would you show her these, like, was she the person that you would show some of these pieces that you were writing?
Well, once in a while I did, yeah. And she was very, I'll tell you, it's curious to me that one of the ones that she was most interested in was the thing about Afghanistan. It was my months living and working in Kabul. And she was very helpful with that. I mean, I was writing it, but she was suggesting little things that I do or not do. And then later on, well, if she was around, she lived a lot of her life in India. So if I was writing and she was in India, I didn't tend to send her things to see. But if she was in New York and I'd written something I liked or had an idea about, and I thought she might have something to say about it, I would show it to her, and she usually just tended to like them and say, "Go on and do more," and so forth. Mm-hmm. She very rarely advised me not to do something, and occasionally I would say, "Well, I want to write about such and such," and then she would say, "Sometime, no, don't do that," and so on. And I tended.
And would you listen to her? Would you listen to that advice?
Yeah, I did sometimes. Or it would just be a certain aspect of something that I had some extra thing that I wanted to write about, and she would advise that I not write about it, this sort of thing.
Okay.
But it was always very positive. I mean, she had a lot of wonderful ideas and stuff.
See, but it's funny though, because there were a couple examples where Ruth perhaps felt you shouldn't make a particular film, or she didn't understand why you wanted to make a film out of the novel.
Right. I mean, that happened too. I mean, she would be, she was around all the time. Excuse me. She was up here in this house a lot. I'd see her in New York. She's always reading something. And I remember she was reading a novel by Jean Rhys, the novel called Quartet, and she just left it lying around somewhere, and I'd never heard of Jean Rhys, but I picked it up. But because it's set in it was written during and is set in 1920s Paris, which has always interested me, I immediately began to read it, and I thought, oh, this is wonderful. I'd love to make this into a movie. And I told her immediately, oh, this would make a great movie. And then she said, oh, Jim, it is so low spirited. You don't want to make a movie out of that. But we did. It was never one of our more popular movies, though it's one of my favorite movies that I ever made. But I guess it was low spirited. And so she would, it was like that, or other things that she wanted us to do very much. I mean, like Howard's End. Howard's End she likened to a sort of mountain that one had to climb, that it was standing there and it was inviting people to climb that peak. And I mean, I couldn't even, I had read it, but it didn't attract me that much. I didn't especially like any of the characters that much and so on. But we did indeed make Howard's End, which became one of our most successful movies, and one of my favorites now that it's made. I do like the characters, although Forster, when he wrote that book, he said there wasn't a single character, including Margaret Schlegel, in that novel that he liked. Now it's hard to imagine something like that. The author of the novel didn't like his leading lady, but I'm talking about his leading lady that he wrote about, not the one of the film. He wasn't around anymore when the film was made.
Well, but then Ruth, as the person who did the adaptation, and again, this is something that I have a little piece of in my film. Ruth sent you letters, kind of talking about some of the challenges of adapting that novel, Howard's End, to screenplay. And again, you all made Margaret Schlegel, and Emma Thompson made Margaret Schlegel, that character, exceedingly likable. Yes.
He just
yes.
That exactly.
Right. So getting back to the book, a little bit. So just question, what compelled you to write these pieces if no one was really asking for them? What was it about it that made you want to put these pieces together through the years?
Well, no, and I wrote them because I like to write. It's as simple as that. It was something that's happened to me, or I have been somewhere or seen something that's interesting. I mean, I think of myself to some extent as a writer, and I wrote it down. I mean, for a good example of that, I think is a chapter. It's not a chapter, but it's a section of the book at the end, which is called The Great Ball at Wilton. And I went to a tremendous aristocratic ball at a great house in England, a great country house and it was so extraordinary what was going on there. And I just felt I had to write it down. I mean, I'd never been in a scene like that. I probably never would be again. And it just seemed interesting to me to write about. And so I did. So there are things like that. I just wrote because I wanted to write. And that was a long, long time ago. I wrote that in the late 70s, but there it is, and so on.
And then when did you start to, so I know you were saying you would show some of these pieces to Ruth.
Well, yeah, there were some short pieces that I wrote, one or two pieces about some of my boyfriends when I was in high school. And I thought, well, I'll show this to Peter and see what he has to say. And he had never seen anything else. I mean, I hadn't shown him anything else. And so I showed him those. It was the chapter called Jimmy Boyd. And I let him read Jimmy Boyd. And he said, well, gosh, I mean, what else have you got? And then he showed Jimmy Boyd to Jonathan Galassi at Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and he liked it and thought, well, this is maybe not so bad. So this might be fun to do and turn into a book. And by that time, there were a lot of different things that I could draw into it. And they were things that I had written really sort of professionally. I wrote a very long piece about Vanessa Redgrave, the making of the Bostonians film, and it was about Vanessa Redgrave as an artist and as a person and as a character. And I wrote that for Sight and Sound, the British film magazine. So that was, that's like a big block of the story and so on. So I had these things that I had written, which I liked, and then there's some others that I sort of concocted as I went along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also worth mentioning that Peter has a small press that he runs.
Right,
I think it was called Wallflower Press, and then it became Shrinking Violet Press, I believe.
right.
And so he was actually publishing these pieces.
After he'd seen the Jimmy Boyd one, then he asked to see what else I had, and I showed him a group. And I think all in all, there were I believe 8 volumes came out in his press, up to a certain point. I mean, they didn't include huge things like, the thing on the Great Ball at Wilton or that kind of thing. It didn't include those, but it was a lot of small pieces that he liked and he printed.
Yes. Yeah, and those books were, they're kind of like kind of homemade books.
Well,
They're
they're
very
homemade
beautiful.
books and most beautifully.
Yeah,
They're
I mean,
on wonderful paper.
yep.
They have these wonderful hand-sewn cloth covers, and they're not very big. They're maybe like that, and beautiful, printed on beautiful paper. And they didn't have, as I remember, they I don't know whether there were illustrations or not. Probably there were, but anyway, it's quite a collection.
Yeah, there were some there were some illustrations and photos kind of built into those books. But yeah,
Right.
there was it was a short, there was a small kind of run of those books. So,
Right.
maybe, Peter created maybe
Oh yeah,
25.
he'd only do so many
That's right.
of each with the cloth covers. I mean, I think he would have a small edition of 10 or 20. They all sold out like that.
Yeah.
There are almost none left. One or two that.
And then how was it working with Peter as an editor? Like, what was that relationship? What did that look like? I mean, would he make changes or suggest changes?
He was a very, he would suggest things, and he would suggest that, why don't we move this around, and this paragraph might be better in this section and not there, and those kinds of things. I mean, he's a wonderful novelist, and has published many books himself, and I mean, of his own work, and he knows how things should be.
Yeah.
Let me put it that way. And so I was extremely grateful to have him helping me like that.
And what if, I mean, I guess this is a two-part question. What do you think Ismail and Ruth would say about you publishing Solid Ivory? Because again, you really share some kind of intimate details of your life. What do you think their reaction would be now that this book is out in the world?
As far as Ruth's concerned, I think I don't think she would have had any objection to any of it, really. She was very open-minded about this. Well, she had to be very open-minded about us. I mean, what else could she be? And as for Ismail, I could imagine that maybe there were some things that there might not even be things that one would think of as being unmentionable. Not things like that, but perhaps his work methods, which I don't. I say, this is what he said. This is the way he acted on that particular day, and it was like that. And I described the day, and he might have seemed like a monster on that day, or he might have seemed like the greatest sort of Godfather type that you could ever imagine, or whatever. He might not. You get more careful when you're older, and maybe.
Although you do go there a little bit with some of your personal, like, your relationship with, Ismail, which I think, I mean, inevitably people are just kind of interested in that. And that's something you haven't talked about.
No, and they don't get much in the book either.
Right. Well, they get a little bit in my film, but a little bit. Okay, so yeah, and then I guess another question: so have you read the reviews of the book, and are you happy with the?
Yeah, they're sent to me by my agent, and I have two agents. I have an agent for films, that's Rand Holston in California, and then I have another agent at ICM who is the one for the book, who's actually Peter's agent, right?
Yeah, which is Anna Stein, right?
Yeah, Anna Stein. I'm sorry.
And so did anything surprise you with kind of the reception for the book, or?
No, I mean, well, now and then there would be something that I thought was it necessary to make that point particularly? Why they could not have made this point? You know, I think that's true of any writer. When they read a review of their book, they think, well, why the hell are they talking about that when they really ought to talk about this, because this is so much more interesting and means so much more to me, and they want to talk about that. So there was a bit of that, you know.
Yeah.
That would be, if you're going to publish anything, or you make anything, that's what you get.
Yep, for sure. I mean the same went for your films,
the same
right?
goes for the films. I mean, our films would come out, and people would say it was a good review, and they go on and on and on about, and then you think, well, they've said enough about that. They should say something about that, but they don't, and so you feel let down.
Well, can you talk a little bit about, that example? I would bring up Jefferson in Paris and Surviving Picasso. Those two films.
Those were two films of ours, which were big studio films. Jefferson in Paris was made by Disney, and it's a film about when Jefferson was the American ambassador to France, just before the French Revolution, and he was a slave owner, and he took one of his slaves as a companion to his daughter to Paris with him, a young woman named Sally Hemings, who was actually his wife's half sister, and she was black, and she a quarter black anyway. Well, and that girl became his mistress and was his mistress till the end of his life. Now, that was at the time of Jefferson's life. Everybody knew about it. Everybody knew about Dusky Sally and her brood. All the papers in Washington knew all about that, and they didn't care really. But so nobody talked about that for 150 years. And then when we started talking about it again, people were outraged. The idea that such a fine person as Thomas Jefferson, such a great man, and he was a great man and a fine person, but that such a man would have had a black mistress and several black children. Well, they weren't even black. They were practically all white, but they were outraged in 1995 when that film actually appeared on the screen. I mean, they couldn't believe it and didn't want to talk about it. And Jefferson was like a god. And so this film seemed to be showing him more as a man and not really so godly. And the same thing applied to the film that we made about Picasso. We made a film about Picasso's relationship with Françoise Gillot, who's still alive, 100 years old, but she's still with us, living in New York and being interviewed. And we made a film about her relationship with Picasso in the 50s and 40s, 50s, 40s and the 50s. And well, Picasso was a god, but he wasn't very nice to people. He was particularly not nice to the various women that he was with. I mean, he did and said terrible things to all of them. Well, some of that was in our movie. I mean, it had to be. And so we came up with this film about Picasso, and it outraged people. They didn't want to know anything about it or even discuss it or write about it. It was just so terrible that we had, said these things about this god, Picasso. So we've had these kinds of episodes in our filmmaking, and there have been some others like that. I mean, it's not all A Room with a View and Remains of the Day. Sometimes you have to read some terrible things about yourself. But if you're going to make movies or write books, you have to expect that.
Mm-hmm. and moving to more of a related to film question, can you talk a little bit about your, like, is there a philosophy you have on directing? And the thing I'm thinking of, and it's something that we talk about in my film, that you talk about the, having the ability to trust people. I mean,
that is not really a philosophy. You can't call it a philosophy, and it came about slowly, I suppose. But I mean, when you're making a film, whether it's an actor or a set designer or a composer or whoever it is, or the screenwriter, you try to hire the best possible person that you've ever heard of for that role in your production. So if you've hired another artist, you have to let them show you what it is what they want to do with this idea. You give them an idea, or you give them a novel, or whatever it is, and you have to let them show you what it is, how they thought about it, the way they see it. You can't just jump in and say, no, not like that, and no, I do it like this. Like, you can't, unless they make some big mistake. If they're making a big mistake, that's different. Then you start shouting. But if they're not making mistakes, and you let them show you what their own talent has brought to this particular task, you have to. And gradually that became a kind of a philosophy. And that included my work with the actors. I mean, I've never been a person who stamped around and shouted at actors. I never believed in that. At times you want to do that, but you can't. A lot of times actors are doing things that you really don't like. But they're happening in an atmosphere and a situation that if you start yelling and acting in a heavy way, you're going to spoil the general mood. So it takes an awful lot of diplomacy and some just outright lying sometimes to get them to do what you want them to do.
But you are known for, Merchant Ivy was known for really, for giving perhaps people without a great deal of experience these amazing opportunities. So well, I'm thinking,
if you wanted, a lot of our films are about very young actors or young characters, young men, young women who really are young. I don't want, if you have someone who's supposed to be 18, I don't want to say an actor who's meant to be an 18-year-old girl. I don't want to hire someone who's 30. I'd rather hire an 18-year-old girl who is an actress, maybe not an actress even, but who looks fantastic and has fantastic personality. I want to hire that person and not somebody who's, a very experienced actress who's 15 years too old. So you do give chances to people, and it's not just actors, but young actors as well. You have to give them, you have to believe in them and trust their talents. And you come after a while to feel who has them and who has talent and who doesn't. I mean, you don't really know what talent they have, but what you can judge is their personality. Do they have looks and personality of a certain kind, which is individual and interesting and fresh and new? You can see that. And of course, since they're young, it's easy to see.
One of the interviews I did in the film was with Celestia Fox, who is your longtime casting director. And she would say that actors would come in and sometimes it wasn't always about, reading, maybe some of the pages, but like it would just be, you would sit down and you would talk and you would get to know that person. Is that right? Like you would sometimes just go at it from that?
I mean, you couldn't really ask some big actors, you couldn't really ask them to read. We made a film with James Mason once towards the end of his career, in which he's this extraordinary autobiography of a princess. Well, when we met James Mason, you can't say, well, would you mind reading some of this? I'd like to hear you speak these lines. You can't do that. You just have a conversation to get to know the person. I mean, you've already decided. I mean, if James Mason is going to do a lead in your movie, then you don't you don't sit down to talk about how, you know, how they should do it.
Hmm.
You leave it to them to do it and show you and amaze you.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, my last kind of comment on this is, I mean, there are these names, Helena Bonham Carter, Tandy Newton, who was in Jefferson in Paris. Early Gwyneth Paltrow was in Jefferson in Paris, a young kind of not so experienced. You've really gave a lot of, Hugh Grant in Morris, right? Rupert Graves in both The Room of the View and Morris. I mean, again, it just that is something that you get, a lot of credit for, giving people, and it's not only the people in front of the camera, it was also the people, behind the camera.
Right.
Yep.
Well, I mean, there are certain people on a film that they have to be deeply experienced. Otherwise, they have to be. I mean, your cameraman has to be a really great cameraman. Otherwise, you had it. There's that sort of thing.
Right.
Do you mind if I'm
Sure.
sorry to interrupt. This is a fantastic, wonderful, in-depth conversation, but we have almost 20 questions in the Q&A. Should I go to a few of the audience members?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
There's some interesting questions. Here's one for Jim. Your casting choices seem picture perfect. I can't imagine any actors other than Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson in Remains of the Day. But which actors might you wish you had the opportunity to work with?
Well, they're gone. They're not. They're not around anymore. They're people that I think about. There are certain projects that I would have liked to have made that I didn't make and would have had well, who am I thinking of particularly? Katharine Hepburn. I wish I'd made a film with Katharine Hepburn. I mean, she was extraordinary. That sort of thing. Marlon Brando. I mean, you think about that kind of thing. But is that a sufficient answer? Or
yeah, that's good. Here's another one. We've got a lot of them here from the audience who really have some great questions. I know it's like picking a favorite child, but out of all your films and the experience of making them, is there one that stands out as a favorite?
No, there's more than one, but there is one that's particularly autobiographical, and I think it turned out to be it's hardly known anymore. It starred Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, and it's the film called Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, which was made from two novels by Evan Cannell, and it's set in Kansas City in the 30s and the 40s. And I think that's my most personal film, or my favorite film, because it's very autobiographical. I mean, I grew up in a small town which had all the kinds of organizations and ideas and that family and the people and those characters in Kansas City had. I mean, it was a world that I knew perfectly. And it had a father figure in it who reminded me of my own father, and so on. And I think that's probably my favorite film of all the films that I've done, because it is so autobiographical. There is another one that's also quite autobiographical, I think, and that is A Soldier's Daughter Never Cries, part of which was made in Paris, and part of it which was made in North Carolina. But then I like some of the big ones as well. I mean, I like Remains of the Day very much. And I certainly like, Room with a View and Howard's End. And then some others I like very much. I like the film that I mentioned with James Mason, The Autobiography of a Princess. That was a film really about India. And I think it's our best Indian film, though people don't know it. It was made for television, but I think it really is our deepest Indian film. I liked another Indian film from a novel by Ruth called Heat and Dust, which she won the Booker Prize for that when it came out. And that's another favorite of mine. I like the film that really sort of bombed financially, but I really loved it, which was Quartet, which I mentioned, made in Paris in the 1920s.
You're muted, Paul. Oh,
Another
there you go.
interesting audience question. Sorry about that. Can you talk a bit about your experience as an LGBT filmmaker actively making critically acclaimed films? Did you or Ismail run into any overt active discrimination?
Never, never. And when we made two LGBT films, you want to call them that, one being Morris, and which came out of the height of the AIDS epidemic, people dying all the time. But no one seemed to dare to criticize that film. They could not bring themselves to criticize that film, and I think it was the timing of it. And then when we came out with, the whole world had changed by the time we did Call Me by Your Name, the other film, which Ismail was not around for. He was not involved in that. But no, there was never anything.
Here's another question. Can you speak to civility in filmmaking? I want to know more about what fosters civility on set and off. Excellent question.
Well, no one would ever dream of fighting really with the director. You just wouldn't. It would be like suicide. Though there are actors who have done that, and I have managed to save myself in the movie when they do that. As I said, there's an awful amount of diplomacy that goes into it, and you have your bad memories later on, which you share or you don't share with people. But people who are making a film, basically, two things are there. They're extremely grateful that they're getting to make a film at all, because most people don't get to be in films or work in films who want to. I mean, like actors, for instance. So they're so grateful to be there doing it, and then they're very insecure. Extremely insecure, actors particularly. You cannot believe how insecure some actors are, and I'm just amazed at the time when that is suddenly it's revealed in some kind of way. And so you have to be so careful and I don't know, keep people happy and help their insecurities and we had a sort of funny thing about insecurity once. And it involved a very famous actor, Daniel Day-Lewis. Now, when we were working with Daniel Day-Lewis in A Room with a View, I felt that his fingernails were too long for a middle-class character that he was playing of that type. And I felt he should cut his nails. And I sent various messages via the makeup people that it really his nails should be a little bit shorter. That I found them a little, I don't know, little fancy or effeminate or whatever. Not effeminate, but anyway, I didn't like him. He never cut his nails. And I thought, well, I can't make a fuss because he's doing such a fantastic job. His acting is so extraordinary. His scenes are so fabulous, marvelous in every possible way. I don't want to disturb him and upset him and make him feel that I don't appreciate him in any tiny way. So I shut up. So there are things like that.
And that makes me want to go back and look at A Room with a View and look at Daniel Day-Lewis's.
You don't really
can't edit the film anymore, Stephen. It's done. But this is great. You can jump in, but there's a lot of. I'm looking at 10 great questions. Here's one more. Very specific.
Just one thing. Yeah, just one thing I wanted to mention though. But like, I was curious when you were talking about actors and insecurity. It did make me think of you working with Vanessa Redgrave, and Vanessa Redgrave was somebody
but insecure. Let me tell you that.
Right.
She makes me feel insecure. Me.
And she had no problems kind of going to Ismail and voicing her opinions about.
Never. No, she always did. And sometimes they fought. Sometimes she and I fought.
Right.
Here's a very specific one. Why was Julian Sands replaced with James Wilby on Morris?
Who knows? Who knows? He suddenly decided that one, he was going to leave his wife and child. This was in London. He's English. They were English. He was going to leave, separate from his wife and child. Little boy was about a year and a half. He's going to leave his agent, very, very good agent in London. He was going to leave England, and he was going to leave the acting profession. He was going to do all those things, walk away from it. Well, if someone tells you, like 6 weeks before you start, he's the lead in your movie, and he tells you that 6 weeks before the movie's to start, you don't quite know what to do. But anyway, he did walk away. He did all those things. He left his wife, his country, and so on. He moved to New York, and so I had to find another person, and we were able to, luckily. Yeah.
Well, you remember James Wilby, right? From
Well, James Wilby had a very small part, not even a part really, in A Room with a View, but he was really almost an extra practically, but he agreed to do that, and I remembered him. I remembered how good he was, and the sort of way he lounged during this music thing, and I just liked him. But I remember that had a Morris. We already had a Clive, and that was Hugh Grant. We had a Clive, and he had dark hair. So I wanted to have a blonde Morris. It's just the opposite from the book. It's the other way around in the novel itself. But anyway, we had a dark-haired Clive, and so I wanted to have a blonde Morris. And so one of the reasons I cast James Wilby, since I already had Hugh Grant, one of the reasons I cast him was that he was a blonde. When he heard that later on, and he thought that the only reason he cast me was because he was a blonde. And that was our joke for a long time. But no, I cast him because I liked him. It was good. Those are the kinds of reasons you have. I mean, if you have one lead who has dark hair, then you like to contrast it with another lead who's a blonde, maybe.
Right.
And that's what I was doing.
So this is question. Congratulations on your Oscar for Call Me by Your Name. Where do you keep the Oscar? And any update on a sequel to the film?
Well, that Oscar moves around. Sometimes at the moment it's in my apartment in New York, and I had to take it to town because I can't remember why exactly, but it's in town. Sometimes it's up here. But no, I don't know how there could be an actual sequence, a sequel to that film. There's no way there is a sequel as the novel. There is an actual novel that is the sequel to the story, but I do not know how anybody would make Timothy Chalamet look 40. So I don't want to be the person that has to struggle with that.
Here's a comment more than a question. In the 1980s, I studied all of Sir David Lean's films while at university. Today, film schools would be wise to encourage students to watch your vast breadth of work. Not a question, but just a compliment. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, you're welcome, and I hope that to some extent they do that, but I don't suppose they do.
Well, hopefully my film will encourage more appreciation and more recognition of the incredible body of work that you've produced. And my last question is, what are you working on now? I know that you did the adaptation of a French novel called The End of Eddie. I just kind of want to hear what are you working on?
Well, we're waiting for that. They need a director for that. I mean, I was hired to write. It's going to be a television series, a fairly short television series, probably not on like 6 episodes. And I was hired to write the first one, the opening one, which was somewhat longer than it ought to have been. So in a way, I've already written 2 episodes. And the people who commissioned that, they're happy with it. And I'm happy with it. I like it. But they have to find a director for it. And so far, no director has come forward who wants to do it.
Weren't you talking about Gus Van Sant as a possible director?
Well, I thought, yeah, he'd be great, but I don't think he wants to do it. Gus Van Sant at the moment is he's more painting than anything else, I think.
Okay.
He'd be great. He'd be wonderful. If only he would do the first 2, say, and kind of set the tone and the mood of it and get it cast and all of that. If he would just do that, and then, other people would have to come along and do another episode. Maybe even I could be coached or coached.
There's more questions here, but I think this is a good closing question. We're coming up on an hour. You've been very generous with your time, Jim.
That's what I have a lot of, at least, I'm happy to sit and bang on here.
The book is Solid Ivory. The film by Stephen Soucy, who's been our moderator, is Merchant Ivory. Hopefully you'll be streaming it or watching it in the theater sometime soon. We're very grateful that you spent the evening with us here at the Writers Institute. We had a wonderful audience. I'm looking at the numbers tick up throughout. Here's a good final question. You've seen the industry change and evolve over the decades. You're happily still a very relevant participant in films as they are made today. Do you think you could become the filmmaker you've become if you were starting out as an independent filmmaker today? What has changed to make it harder, easier, different to make your name in the industry in filmmaking today?
Well, let me just say, I get all the Academy screeners of the not all, but many of the different films that have come out during the year, and most of those films have been made for Amazon, Apple, whatever. They're not independent films. They will not have any life in theaters, but they are wonderful films sometimes. They are just so terrific. I see all kinds of things here. They're excellent. And it's just a different way of movie making, a different kind of movie making. I don't know how hard it is to get into that. I'm past all that now. I couldn't do it. I'm too old. But I think I've seen probably, a good 6, 8 films, which are absolutely wonderful this year. Don't ask me to name them. I can't remember.
This has been really wonderful.
Really, really good. Last, I saw a wonderful, wait a minute, hold on. Yeah, I saw a wonderful film last night made by the French, mainly, off the coast of Massachusetts, called Coda. And it's about people who fish and are deaf. It was a wonderful film. So they're being made. There's no problem. I mean, films are going to go on, and there are going to be people who want to make them, and there are going to be all kinds of ways to make them. I have the feeling that the greatest films are yet to come. And what has been made already, no matter what they are to films what daguerreotypes are to photography. That with the extraordinary means that we now have of making films and the fantastic kind of ways of making films, when some great directors come along, the things they're going to do are just out of this world.
Well, I really thank everyone for.
Sorry about. I don't think it's all going downhill.
I'm so glad that's a great note of optimism to end on. This has been a wonderful evening. The book is Solid Ivory. We've added a link right here on your screen, our independent bookseller. You can find it anywhere that you buy your books. It's a wonderful book. Thanks for joining us. Come to the Albany Film Festival on April 2nd. Everyone who loves film, we hope you'll be there. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Stephen. Great night.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's been fun.